The phone call came just as I was wrapping up a long day at work. The hum of the office had finally quieted, and I was tidying up my desk, mentally preparing to head home. My phone buzzed on the desk, and seeing my wife's name on the screen brought a smile to my face. It wasn't unusual for her to call around this time, often to remind me to pick up something on my way back or to ask how my day had been. "Hey, love," I answered, the warmth in my voice instinctive. "I was just about to head out. What's up?" Her tone, when she replied, was cold. So cold it sent a chill through me. "Mark, I need to talk to you." I paused, my smile fading. "Is everything okay?" "No," she said bluntly. "I want a divorce." The words hit me like a freight train, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Divorce. The words sounded foreign, misplaced, completely out of context for us. We weren't perfect, no couple was, but I had never imagined things were bad enough for this. "Wait, what?" I stammered, trying to process what I had just heard. "Chloe, what are you talking about? A divorce? Where is this coming from?" "I've made up my mind," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I don't want to discuss it with you. If you have questions, speak to my lawyer." "Your lawyer?" I repeated, my chest tightening. "You've already spoken to a lawyer?" "Yes," she said simply. "You'll be hearing from him soon. Don't try to call me, Mark. This is final." "Final?" I echoed, my voice rising. "Chloe, this is insane. At least give me an explanation. What happened? What did I do wrong?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she might relent, that she might offer some insight into this sudden declaration. But when she finally spoke, her voice was as cold and detached as ever. "I don't owe you an explanation," she said. "This is what I want. Goodbye, Mark." The line went dead, leaving me standing there, phone in hand, stunned and speechless. My heart was pounding, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. How could this be happening? We had been married for 7 years, and while things hadn't been perfect, I thought we were solid. Sure, there had been some distance between us lately. She had been more withdrawn, more irritable, but I had chalked it up to stress or a rough patch. I never thought it would come to this. The drive home was a blur. My mind replayed her words over and over, each repetition adding another layer of confusion and pain. "I don't owe you an explanation." How could she be so cold, so dismissive of everything we'd shared? When I finally walked through the door of our home, the emptiness hit me like a physical blow. The house was quiet, eerily so. The absence of her presence was palpable. I wandered through the rooms, looking for some clue, some sign that could explain what had gone so horribly wrong. But everything looked the same, neatly arranged, perfectly in place, as though nothing had changed. Except everything had changed. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty seat across from me. This was where we used to have dinner together, where we would talk about our day and make plans for the weekend. Now it felt like a hollow reminder of what I had lost. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every moment over the past year. Had I missed something? Was there a sign, a warning I had ignored? My mind was a whirlpool of doubts and regrets, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find an answer. By morning, I was exhausted but resolute. I wasn't going to let this end without understanding why. If Chloe wouldn't give me an explanation, I would find one myself. I didn't deserve to be blindsided like this, to have my life upended without warning or reason. I made a decision then and there. I would meet with her lawyer. I would demand answers, and I would uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The next few days passed in a haze of disbelief and frustration. Chloe's abrupt call replayed in my mind like a haunting refrain. I couldn't focus on anything, not work, not friends, not even basic tasks around the house. Her words had left me spinning, and the unanswered questions gnawed at me. Then came the email. It was from her lawyer, a man named Robert Miller. The message was professional and clinical, outlining the steps for the impending divorce and requesting a meeting to discuss the terms. Reading it felt like a punch to the gut. Chloe had really planned this. She had already moved pieces on a chessboard I hadn't even known I was standing on. I scheduled the meeting for 2 days later, a mix of dread and determination churning in my stomach. I wasn't just going to roll over and let her dictate how this ended. I needed answers. When the day arrived, I walked into the law office with my head held high, though my insides felt like they were tied in knots. The receptionist greeted me with a rehearsed smile, directing me to a conference room. Robert was already there, seated at a polished wooden table with a stack of papers in front of him. He looked up as I entered, and I caught a flicker of something in his expression. Was it unease? Guilt? Whatever it was, it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a practiced professionalism. "Mark," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Please, have a seat." I sat down, studying him. Robert was an older man, well-dressed, but with an air of weariness about him. His hands trembled slightly as he shuffled the papers in front of him. "I'm sure this situation is difficult for you," he began, his tone measured. "I'll do my best to make this process as smooth as possible." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "I appreciate the sentiment, Mr. Miller, but I didn't come here to discuss logistics. I came here for answers. Why is Chloe doing this? What changed?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the papers in front of him. "I'm not at liberty to discuss personal matters," he said finally. "Don't give me that," I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "You've been working with my wife to dismantle our marriage, and I deserve to know why. Was there someone else? Did I do something wrong? Tell me the truth." Robert's hands stilled, and for a moment the mask of professionalism slipped. He looked genuinely uncomfortable, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Mark," he said slowly, "I understand your frustration, but my role here is to represent my client. That's all I can say." But there was something in his eyes, something that told me he wasn't entirely on board with the story he was being paid to tell. I leaned forward, my voice lowering. "Mr. Miller," I said, keeping my tone steady, "you're clearly a decent man. I can see it, and I can see that you're uncomfortable. Whatever Chloe has told you, I'm asking you as one human being to another. Please, tell me the truth." He didn't respond right away, his gaze darting to the door as though he expected Chloe to burst in at any moment. Finally, he sighed, removing his glasses and rubbing his temples. "I shouldn't be telling you this," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "But you deserve to know." I held my breath, waiting. "Your wife has been planning this for months," he admitted, his voice low. "She's been working to build a case, gathering evidence to ensure she gets the majority of your shared assets. And there's someone else. She's been seeing him for a while." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I had suspected, deep down, but hearing it confirmed was a different kind of pain. "Someone else," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Robert nodded, avoiding my gaze. "I can't give you specifics, but I can tell you that she's been very strategic about this. She's not just trying to end the marriage, she's trying to come out ahead." Anger flared in my chest, hot and sharp. Months! She had been plotting this while I worked late nights to provide for us, while I thought we were just going through a rough patch. She had been smiling to my face while stabbing me in the back. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," I said curtly, my voice tight with restrained fury. "You've told me what I needed to know." He looked at me, a flicker of regret crossing his face. "Mark, for what it's worth, I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I left the office with my mind racing, a storm of emotions threatening to consume me. Betrayal, anger, heartbreak, they all swirled together, leaving me barely able to think. But beneath it all, a new resolve began to take shape. Chloe might have been planning this for months, but I wasn't going to let her blindside me any longer. If she wanted to fight, I was ready for one. As I drove home, a single thought kept repeating in my mind. This isn't over. The drive home felt like a blur, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as I replayed the lawyer's words in my mind. She's been planning this for months. There's someone else. I couldn't decide what hurt more, the betrayal of our marriage or the calculated way Chloe had gone about dismantling it. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, had been orchestrating my downfall while I remained oblivious. When I arrived home, the house felt colder than ever. The walls that had once witnessed love and laughter now felt suffocating, their silence a constant reminder of Chloe's absence and her betrayal. I sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the coffee table. The anger that had burned so hot in the lawyer's office was beginning to simmer into something colder, more determined. If Chloe thought she could blindside me, she was wrong. I wasn't going to roll over and let her take everything I had worked for. I was going to fight back. But I needed a plan. I needed help. The next day, I called my old friend Chris. Chris was a lawyer himself, though he specialized in business law. Still, he was someone I trusted, someone I knew would guide me honestly. When I explained the situation, he didn't hesitate. "Mark," he said firmly, "you need to protect yourself. Chloe's already taken steps to secure her position, so now it's your turn. Gather everything, financial records, property deeds, anything that shows your contribution to the marriage. We're going to build a case." Chris's confidence was a balm to my frayed nerves. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. Over the next week, I threw myself into the task. I combed through bank statements, emails, and receipts, piecing together the financial picture of our marriage. What I found only deepened my sense of betrayal. Chloe had opened a separate account months ago, siphoning money from our joint account without my knowledge. She had made expensive purchases I couldn't trace to anything in our home. And then there were the credit card charges, dinners, hotels, gifts. All of it pointed to this someone else Robert had mentioned. It was like uncovering a secret life, one that Chloe had hidden behind smiles and feigned affection. The more I discovered, the angrier I became. But the anger wasn't paralyzing anymore. It was fuel. Chris and I met regularly, going over every detail. He was meticulous, asking questions I hadn't considered and helping me see the cracks in Chloe's strategy. He also urged me to start documenting everything, from emails with her lawyer to any interactions we might have in the future. "She's been strategic," Chris said, his tone serious. "You need to be smarter. Stay calm, stay focused, and don't let her bait you." I nodded, committing his advice to memory. Staying calm was easier said than done, but I knew he was right. If I let my emotions get the better of me, I'd lose the advantage I was beginning to build. One evening, as I sat in my workshop sorting through old receipts, a memory surfaced. It was from 6 months ago, on our anniversary. Chloe had insisted on going out to dinner at an upscale restaurant. I had been reluctant, money was tight, and I suggested something more modest. But she had pushed, and I had relented, thinking it was important to make her happy. Looking back, I realized she hadn't been happy that night. She had been distracted, checking her phone constantly and barely engaging in conversation. At the time, I thought it was work stress. Now, I wondered if she had been texting him. The thought made my stomach turn, but it also solidified my resolve. I had spent so much time doubting myself, wondering what I could have done differently. But the truth was, Chloe had made her choices long before that night, and now it was my turn to make mine. Chris called a few days later with news. "Mark, we've got enough to push back. The evidence of her separate account and those suspicious charges is strong. But we'll need more if we want to dismantle her case completely. "What do you suggest?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "Hire a private investigator," Chris said bluntly. "If she's seeing someone, we need proof. It'll strengthen your position, especially if her relationship started before she filed for divorce." The idea made me uneasy. Spying on Chloe felt invasive, wrong, even after everything she had done. But Chris was right. If I wanted to protect myself, I needed every piece of information I could get. After a sleepless night of wrestling with the decision, I made the call. The investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Diane, assured me she would handle everything discreetly. "You'll have what you need," she promised. "Just be patient." Patience wasn't my strong suit, but I didn't have a choice. For now, all I could do was wait and prepare. Chloe had set this game in motion, but I was determined to finish it on my terms. As I stood in the quiet of my workshop that night, the weight of everything settled on my shoulders. The betrayal, the lies, the fight ahead, it was overwhelming. But beneath the exhaustion was a spark of determination. Chloe thought she had the upper hand, but she underestimated me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The following days tested my patience in ways I hadn't expected. Diane, the private investigator, was methodical, her updates sparse but thorough. Every evening, I waited for her calls or emails, each one bringing a mix of anticipation and dread. I wasn't sure what I wanted her to find. Proof of Chloe's betrayal would strengthen my case, but it would also shatter the last remnants of the woman I once loved. Meanwhile, Chris and I continued building my defense. He was relentless, dissecting every detail Chloe had used to paint me as inattentive or unworthy of our shared assets. With each piece of evidence we uncovered, bank statements, financial transfers, receipts for lavish expenses, my anger shifted from raw betrayal to a steely determination. "She's banking on you folding," Chris said during one of our late-night strategy sessions. "She thinks you'll just let her walk away with everything because you don't want to fight. Prove her wrong." I nodded, my resolve hardening. I wasn't going to let Chloe reduce me to a footnote in her new life. One evening, Diane called. Her voice was calm, but tinged with something else. Urgency, maybe. "Mark, I've got something," she said. "It's significant." I sat up straighter, gripping the phone tightly. "What is it?" "I've confirmed the identity of the man she's been seeing," Diane continued. "His name is Daniel Lowe. He's a partner at her firm." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. A colleague, someone she worked with daily. It made sense now. Her late nights at the office, the sudden work trips, the way she dismissed my concerns as paranoia. Daniel had been there all along, just under the surface of our life together. "There's more," Diane added. "I found records of them traveling together. Weekend getaways, dinners at expensive restaurants, even a hotel stay the night before she called you about the divorce." Her words felt like a second blow, but this time they fueled my determination. "Do you have proof?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "I do," she replied. "Photos, receipts, timestamps, everything you'll need to establish infidelity, if it comes to that." I thanked her, ending the call and staring at my phone in silence. The evidence was there. Chloe's betrayal was no longer a suspicion or a gut feeling. It was a documented fact. The next day, Chris and I met to review Diane's findings. The photos were damning. Chloe and Daniel walking hand in hand, sharing intimate dinners, leaving a hotel together. The paper trail was just as incriminating, with charges to their names linked to luxury hotels and first-class travel. "This changes everything," Chris said, spreading the documents across the table. "Infidelity is a game-changer in divorce proceedings. It not only discredits her, but it also strengthens your case for keeping the majority of your assets." I nodded, a grim sense of satisfaction settling over me. "What's our next move?" "We use this to confront her," Chris said. "She's been operating under the assumption that she holds all the cards. Once she realizes you know the truth, the power dynamic shifts." The confrontation came sooner than expected. Chloe's lawyer, Robert, reached out to schedule a meeting, citing a need to finalize asset distribution. I agreed, knowing this was the perfect opportunity to reveal what we'd uncovered. The day of the meeting, I walked into the law office with Chris by my side. Robert was already there, his usual unease palpable, and Chloe sat across from him, her expression guarded. She looked polished and composed, but I could see the cracks beneath her veneer. "Mark," she said coolly as I entered, "I hope we can settle this quickly and amicably." I gave her a tight smile, taking my seat. "That depends on you." The meeting began with Robert outlining her proposed terms, which were as lopsided as expected. She wanted the house, the car, and a significant portion of my savings. It was as if she expected me to roll over without question. "Before we go any further," I said, interrupting Robert, "there's something you should see." I slid the file Diane had compiled across the table. Chloe hesitated, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at the folder. "What's this?" "Proof," I said simply, "of your relationship with Daniel Lowe. The hotel stays, the dinners, the trips, all of it." Her face drained of color, and her composure faltered for the first time. "This is absurd," she said, her voice trembling. "You had me followed?" "I had to," I replied, my tone calm but firm. "You've been lying to me for months, Chloe. You've been plotting this divorce while seeing someone else and siphoning money from our accounts. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at Chloe with something akin to disappointment. "Chloe," he said quietly, "is this true?" She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the file. The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive, until finally she snapped the folder shut and shoved it away. "This changes nothing," she said defiantly, though her voice lacked conviction. "I still deserve my share." "No, Chloe," I said, leaning forward. "What you deserve is accountability, and that's exactly what you're going to get." The room fell silent again, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Chris gave me a subtle nod, signaling that we had the upper hand. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt like I was in control. Chloe's betrayal had brought me to my knees, but I was done being her victim. It was time to fight back, and I wasn't going to stop until I reclaimed what was mine. The silence in the room was deafening. As Chloe stared at the closed folder, her once confident demeanor crumbling before my eyes, and I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. For weeks, I had been blindsided by her coldness, betrayal, and calculated moves. Now, the tables were turning. Chris leaned forward, his calm voice breaking the tension. "Chloe, it's clear that your actions have created an entirely new dynamic here. Before we proceed further, I suggest you take a moment to reconsider your position." Her lawyer, Robert, looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat as he glanced between Chloe and the damning evidence on the table. "Chloe," he said carefully, "this information significantly impacts our case. I think we need to have a private discussion before continuing." Chloe's head snapped toward him, her eyes blazing. "There's nothing to discuss," she hissed. "This is a smear tactic. He's trying to punish me for wanting out of a broken marriage." I raised an eyebrow, my voice calm and steady. "Chloe, you can spin this however you want, but the facts don't lie. You've been siphoning money, hiding assets, and having an affair. That's not a broken marriage, that's betrayal." Her face flushed, but she didn't reply. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to regain control of the situation. But there was no coming back from this. The evidence was irrefutable, and her lawyer knew it. "Mr. Miller," I said, addressing Robert directly, "you've been operating under the assumption that Chloe has been truthful with you. Now that you know the full story, I trust you'll advise her accordingly." Robert nodded stiffly, his discomfort palpable. "Mark, I assure you I was not aware of these circumstances. I will need to review this evidence in detail and discuss next steps with my client." "You do that," Chris said smoothly, sliding another document across the table. In the meantime, here's a revised proposal for the division of assets. It reflects the reality of the situation, including Mark's contributions to the marriage and Chloe's recent actions. Chloe snatched the document, her hands trembling as she scanned the terms. "This is outrageous," she exclaimed. "You think I'm going to walk away with nothing after everything I've put into this marriage?" Chris remained unfazed. "The terms are fair, considering the circumstances. You'll still receive a settlement, but it won't be the windfall you were hoping for." Chloe's jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought she might argue further, but the weight of the evidence and her own guilt seemed to crush her resolve. She slumped back in her chair, glaring at me with a mixture of anger and despair. "This isn't over," she muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze head-on. "You're right, Chloe. It's not over. But for the first time, I'm the one in control, and I'm not going to let you manipulate me anymore." The meeting ended shortly after, with Robert assuring us that he would review the evidence and get back to us with a revised counteroffer. As Chris and I left the office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just reacting to Chloe's moves, I was taking the lead. Later that evening, as I sat in my workshop, I replayed the day's events in my mind. The confrontation had been draining, but it had also been empowering. I had spent weeks feeling like a victim, blindsided and powerless. Now I saw a path forward. Chloe's betrayal had been calculated, but she had underestimated me. She thought I would fold, that I would let her take everything without a fight, but she was wrong. I wasn't just fighting for my assets or my dignity, I was fighting for myself, for the man I had been before her lies tore me apart. Chris called the next day with an update. "Robert reached out," he said. "They're willing to negotiate. It seems Chloe finally realized her position isn't as strong as she thought." I nodded, a grim smile tugging at my lips. "Good. Let's make sure the terms reflect the truth." As the days turned into weeks, the negotiations continued. Chloe's bravado faded with each passing meeting, replaced by a simmering resentment. She knew she had lost the upper hand, and while she wouldn't admit it, I could see the regret in her eyes. One afternoon, during a particularly tense meeting, she finally broke her silence. "You think you've won," she said bitterly, "but you'll never understand why I had to do this." I stared at her, my expression unreadable. "Maybe I won't, Chloe, but that doesn't excuse what you did." Her eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't reply. The conversation ended there, and I left the meeting with a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Chloe's words no longer had the power to hurt me. I had seen the truth, and I was stronger for it. By the time the settlement was finalized, I felt like a new man. The terms were fair, and while I had to part with some assets, I retained the majority of what I had worked so hard to build. More importantly, I walked away with my dignity intact. Chloe's plans had collapsed, and though the fight had been brutal, I had emerged stronger. The marriage was over, but my life was just beginning. The finality of the settlement brought a strange sense of peace. As much as I had fought for fairness, the process had been grueling, and I was relieved it was finally over. Chloe had signed the documents, her plans to walk away with most of our assets thwarted. What she was left with wasn't insignificant, but it was far less than what she had schemed to take. I left the courthouse that day with my head held high. For weeks I had been bracing myself for this moment, and now that it had come, I felt lighter. The divorce had stripped away more than just a marriage. It had taken the illusions I'd clung to about Chloe and our life together. But in their place, I had gained something far more valuable: clarity and freedom. Chris and I shared a quiet drink that evening, toasting to the end of a battle I hadn't asked for, but had fought with everything I had. "You handled this with more grace than most people would," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "I hope you're proud of that." "I am," I replied, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "I've lost enough in this process. I wasn't going to lose my dignity, too." The next morning, as I sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee, an email notification lit up my phone. It was from Diane, the private investigator. The subject line read, "Final Notes." I opened it, unsure of what more there could be. Inside was a brief summary of Chloe's actions post-settlement. She had officially moved in with Daniel, her lover, and the two had begun the process of consolidating their lives. They had been seen dining at high-end restaurants, traveling, and even attending company events together. On the surface, they appeared to be thriving. But Diane's closing sentence caught my attention. However, there are early signs of tension in their relationship. Sources indicate Daniel has been increasingly distant, and Chloe's behavior suggests she is struggling to maintain the image she worked so hard to build. I set the phone down, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. Chloe's pursuit of a new life at my expense wasn't yielding the happiness she had imagined. But another part of me felt a pang of sadness. She had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. It wasn't my place to gloat or revel in her struggles. Instead, I focused on what lay ahead. The divorce might have marked the end of my marriage, but it wasn't the end of my story. I began reconnecting with old friends, people I had drifted away from during the years I spent trying to salvage a failing relationship. Their warmth and support reminded me that I wasn't alone, that there was still a world of connection and joy waiting for me. I also threw myself into activities I had neglected: hiking, woodworking, even trying my hand at painting. These were things I used to love, but had pushed aside to make room for a marriage that, in hindsight, had demanded far too much of me. One evening, as I worked in my garage on a new piece of furniture, I realized something profound. For the first time in years, I wasn't living for someone else's approval or expectations. I was living for myself, creating a life that was authentic and fulfilling in ways I hadn't thought possible. Chris called a few weeks later, his voice full of energy. "How's post-divorce life treating you?" he asked. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "It's strange, but I feel free." "That's how it should feel," he said. "You've been through hell, Mark, but you came out the other side stronger. Don't lose sight of that." I smiled, appreciating his words. He was right. The experience had been painful, but it had also taught me invaluable lessons about resilience, self-worth, and the importance of surrounding myself with people who truly cared. As the weeks turned into months, the scars of the past began to fade. I heard less and less about Chloe and Daniel. Their lives drifted further from mine. Occasionally, someone would mention seeing them, their relationship marked by tension and cracks in the facade. But I didn't dwell on it. Their story was no longer my concern. Instead, I focused on my own narrative. I invested more time in my woodworking business, growing it into something I could be proud of. I traveled to places I'd always wanted to visit, reconnecting with the adventurous side of myself that had been buried for too long. And, slowly but surely, I began to open myself up to the possibility of new relationships. Not to fill a void, but to share the life I was building with someone who truly valued it. One evening, as I stood on a quiet hill overlooking the city, the sunset painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Chloe's betrayal had once seemed like the end of everything, but now it felt like the beginning of something far greater. I had reclaimed my life, and for the first time in years, it felt like my own. Months passed, and the weight of the divorce began to dissipate like a fog lifting after a long storm. Each day brought a little more clarity, a little more freedom. The scars Chloe had left were still there, but they no longer ached the way they once did. Instead, they served as reminders of what I had endured and overcome. I had been spending more time in my workshop, turning my passion for woodworking into a growing business. Orders were coming in steadily, and each completed piece felt like a small victory. Creating something beautiful out of raw materials was therapeutic, a tangible way to rebuild what had been broken. One afternoon, I received a call from Diane, the private investigator who had played such a pivotal role in uncovering Chloe's betrayal. I hadn't heard from her since the divorce was finalized, so her name on my caller ID piqued my curiosity. "Diane," I greeted her, "what's on your mind?" "Mark," she replied, her tone measured. I wanted to give you a heads up. I've been keeping tabs on Chloe and Daniel per our initial agreement, and things aren't looking good on their end." I sighed, unsure how much I wanted to know. "What do you mean?" "They've been arguing frequently," Diane explained. "It seems Daniel isn't as committed to their relationship as Chloe believed. There are rumors that he's been seeing someone else." I wasn't surprised, but hearing it still left me with a bittersweet taste. Chloe had built her new life on a foundation of deceit, and now that foundation was crumbling beneath her. I thanked Diane for the update and ended the call, my thoughts swirling. Part of me felt vindicated. Chloe was reaping the consequences of her choices. But another part of me felt a pang of sadness. No matter how much pain she had caused me, I didn't wish this kind of turmoil on anyone. Betrayal was a wound I knew all too well. That evening, as I worked on a custom dining table in my workshop, I reflected on how far I had come. The anger and heartbreak that had consumed me in the early days of the divorce were gone, replaced by a quiet strength. I no longer needed to dwell on Chloe's choices or the life she had chosen. My focus was on my own path. A week later, I ran into an old friend, Sarah, at a local market. She was someone I had lost touch with over the years, a casualty of the isolation that came with trying to hold a failing marriage together. Seeing her felt like reconnecting with a piece of myself I had forgotten. "Mark," she exclaimed, her smile genuine, "it's been ages. How have you been?" We spent the next hour catching up, talking about everything from my woodworking business to her recent travels. There was an ease to our conversation that reminded me of simpler times, before life had become so complicated. As we parted ways, she handed me her number. "Don't be a stranger this time," she said with a wink. "Let's grab coffee soon." I smiled, tucking the piece of paper into my pocket. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope, not just for companionship, but for the possibility of building something new with someone who truly valued me. Meanwhile, Chloe's life continued to unravel. News reached me through mutual acquaintances that her relationship with Daniel had officially ended. He had moved on, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a life she had once been so eager to create. I heard whispers of her struggles, financial difficulties, strained friendships, and a growing sense of isolation. I didn't revel in her misfortune, but I couldn't ignore the poetic justice of it all. Chloe had traded stability and loyalty for fleeting excitement, and now she was left with nothing but regret. It wasn't my place to reach out or offer support. Her journey was hers to navigate, just as mine was mine. Over time, the updates about Chloe grew less frequent, and I found myself thinking of her less and less. My energy was focused on building a life that was authentic and fulfilling, one that wasn't defined by the scars of the past. One evening, as I stood on my porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The road I had traveled had been long and painful, but it had brought me to a place of clarity and strength. Chloe's betrayal had once seemed like the end of everything, but now it felt like the beginning of something far greater. I had reclaimed my life, and for the first time, I was living it on my own terms. Whatever lay ahead, I was ready to face it with an open heart and an unshakable sense of purpose. The divorce settlement marked the end of one chapter in my life, but it was far from the end of my journey. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities, and with each passing moment, I felt myself growing stronger, more certain of who I was and what I wanted. My woodworking business was thriving. Orders flooded in faster than I could keep up, and the joy I felt creating something with my own hands was indescribable. The work wasn't just a distraction, it was a passion, a tangible reminder that I was capable of building something meaningful out of the chaos that had once consumed my life. One day, as I was sanding down the legs of a custom coffee table, my phone buzzed on the workbench. It was Chris, my steadfast ally throughout the divorce. "Hey Chris," I said, putting the sander down and wiping my hands on a rag. "What's up?" "Just checking in," he replied. "Wanted to see how you're holding up. It's been a few months since the settlement. How's life treating you?" I smiled, realizing how much lighter I felt now compared to the turmoil of the past. Honestly, better than I expected. Business is great, and I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. That's good to hear, Chris said. You deserve it, Mark. You've been through hell and back, and you've handled it with more grace than most people would. Thanks, Chris, I said, the warmth in his words resonating deeply. I couldn't have done it without your support. As the call ended, I reflected on how far I had come. The man I was now felt worlds apart from the one who had been blindsided by Chloe's betrayal. I had learned to stand on my own, to find strength in my independence, and to embrace the possibilities of a future I was shaping for myself. That evening, I received a text from Sarah, the old friend I had reconnected with at the market. "Hey Mark, still up for that coffee? Let me know when you're free." I stared at the screen for a moment, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. Sarah's text felt like an invitation, not just for coffee, but for something more. It wasn't about rushing into anything. It was about the possibility of building something genuine, free from the shadows of the past. I replied quickly, suggesting a time and place, and as I hit send, I felt a sense of anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. Meanwhile, whispers of Chloe's unraveling life reached me through mutual acquaintances. Her relationship with Eric had officially ended, and with it, her once carefully curated facade had crumbled. She had been forced to downsize her lifestyle, trading in her luxury apartment for a modest rental. Her social circle had dwindled, leaving her isolated and, according to some, deeply unhappy. Hearing about her struggles didn't bring me satisfaction, but it did bring closure. Chloe had chosen her path, and now she was facing the consequences. I didn't harbor hatred or resentment anymore. I simply didn't feel much about her at all. Her story was no longer tied to mine. The coffee with Sarah turned into a series of casual meetups, each one more enjoyable than the last. She had a way of making me laugh, of reminding me that life didn't have to be so heavy. Her presence was refreshing, her honesty a stark contrast to the deceit I had endured. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could let my guard down. One evening, after a long day in the workshop, Sarah joined me for dinner at my place. As we sat on the back porch, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink, she turned to me with a curious expression. "You seem different," she said, her tone thoughtful, "lighter somehow, like you've let go of something heavy." I nodded, her observation hitting close to home. "I think I have," I admitted. "For a long time, I carried so much anger and hurt, but now I've learned to let it go. It's freeing, you know?" She smiled, her eyes warm. "I do, and I'm glad you found that. You deserve it, Mark." As the night wore on, I realized how much I had changed. The pain of the past had shaped me, but it hadn't defined me. I had risen above the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the chaos, emerging stronger and more resilient than I ever thought possible. Chloe's choices had once felt like the end of everything, but now they felt like the beginning of something far greater. My life was mine own again, and for the first time in years, I was living it fully. As Sarah and I sat together, the quiet hum of the evening wrapping around us, I felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to walk, and I was ready for whatever came next. The months that followed were some of the most transformative of my life. Each day felt like a step further from the turmoil of the past and closer to the life I had always wanted to live. My woodworking business continued to grow, bringing a sense of accomplishment that I hadn't felt in years. Customers praised the craftsmanship and care I put into each piece, and for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely proud of what I was building, both in my career and in myself. Sarah and I had grown closer. What had started as casual coffee meetups evolved into something more meaningful. She had a way of seeing through my defenses. Her warmth and honesty drew out parts of me I hadn't realized I had buried. With her, there were no pretenses, no games. For the first time in years, I felt like I could be myself without fear of judgment or betrayal. One evening, as we sat on my back porch, sipping wine and watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, Sarah turned to me with a curious look. "Do you ever think about what your life would look like if things had gone differently?" she asked, her tone thoughtful. I considered her question, the weight of it settling over me. "I used to," I admitted. "After everything with Chloe, I spent a lot of time wondering what I could have done differently, what signs I missed. But now, I don't think about it as much. I've made peace with what happened. It's part of my story, but it's not the whole story." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "That's a good way to look at it. And for what it's worth, I think you're better off now. You've grown so much, Mark. It's inspiring." Her words warmed something deep within me, and I reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Thank you, Sarah. That means a lot." Meanwhile, news of Chloe's struggles continued to trickle in from mutual acquaintances. Her once glittering relationship with Daniel had disintegrated entirely, leaving her alone and scrambling to rebuild her life. She had moved to a smaller town, taking a job far beneath her qualifications just to make ends meet. The woman who had once prided herself on her social status was now a shadow of her former self. I couldn't bring myself to feel much about it anymore. Her life was hers to navigate, just as mine was mine. I had long since stopped carrying the anger and resentment that once consumed me. Instead, I felt a quiet sense of closure. Chloe had made her choices, and so had I. And while our paths had diverged, I hoped for her sake that she would find some semblance of peace one day. As I was finishing up a new project in my workshop, I received a message from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. It was a simple text. "Saw your work online. Looks amazing. Let's catch up soon." It was a reminder of how much I had gained since the divorce, new connections, renewed friendships, and a sense of belonging that I hadn't felt in a long time. The life I was building wasn't perfect, but it was mine, shaped by my choices and the lessons I had learned. That evening, Sarah joined me for dinner, and as we sat together sharing stories and laughter, I realized how much my perspective had shifted. The Mark who had been blindsided by betrayal, who had spent nights consumed by anger and heartbreak, was a distant memory. I was no longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I had gained and what I was creating. As the night wore on, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the fight to reclaim my life. It had all been painful, but it had also been transformative. I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more grounded in who I was and what I wanted. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the future. Whatever lay ahead, I knew I could face it with resilience, determination, and the unwavering belief that I was capable of building something beautiful out of the broken pieces. The years after the divorce felt like a different lifetime altogether. What began as a journey through betrayal and heartbreak transformed into a testament of resilience, self-discovery, and quiet triumph. I had built a life I was proud of, one that wasn't defined by the scars of my past, but rather by the lessons they had taught me. The woodworking business continued to thrive, and with each passing month, it seemed to grow into something bigger than I had ever envisioned. Customers from out of state started placing orders, and I was even approached by a boutique furniture retailer who wanted to carry my pieces. What had started as a personal passion project had become a full-fledged business, and it felt like a reflection of the stability and creativity I had regained in my life. Sarah had become an integral part of my story, too. Our relationship had grown deeper over time, built on mutual respect, honesty, and a shared understanding of life's complexities. She wasn't just a partner, she was a friend, a confidant, and a source of unwavering support. Together, we navigated life's ups and downs with a sense of partnership I hadn't thought possible after Chloe. One evening, as we sat together in my workshop, Sarah watching as I worked on a new piece, she broke the comfortable silence with a question that caught me off guard. "Do you ever think about Chloe?" she asked softly, her tone not accusatory, but curious. I set down my tools, taking a moment to consider her question. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not in the way I used to, though. It's more like she's a character from a story I read a long time ago, someone who taught me important lessons but isn't part of my life anymore." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think she ever found peace?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and I shrugged. I hope so, I said honestly. Not for her sake necessarily, but because everyone deserves a chance to move on. I know I have. In truth, I had heard very little about Chloe in recent years. After her relationship with Daniel ended, she seemed to fade from the circle we once shared. The few updates I had received were second-hand and vague. She had taken a job at a small firm, was living in a modest apartment, and kept mostly to herself. It seemed her once grand ambitions had been replaced by quiet survival. It wasn't my place to reach out or pry further. Her story had diverged from mine, and I was content to leave it that way. Whatever path she was on, it was her journey to navigate. As Sarah and I sat together, the conversation drifted to lighter topics: the upcoming launch of a new furniture line, a trip we were planning, and the little moments of joy we had found in our everyday lives. The contrast between this life and the one I had left behind was stark, but it felt natural, as though this was where I had always been meant to end up. Months later, as I stood in my workshop putting the finishing touches on a custom dining set, I received an unexpected email. It was from Chloe. Mark, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted to reach out. I've been doing a lot of reflecting lately, and I realize how much damage I caused, how much pain I inflicted on you. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I regret what I did. You deserved better than how I treated you, and I'll carry that regret for the rest of my life. I'm glad to hear you're thriving. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for. Chloe. I stared at the email for a long moment, unsure how to feel. Her words were sincere, but they didn't stir the emotions they might have once. I wasn't angry, nor was I particularly moved. I had already made peace with our past, and while her apology was appreciated, it wasn't something I needed anymore. I closed the email without replying, filing it away both physically and mentally. Chloe's words were her own burden to carry, not mine. My life was no longer tied to hers, and I was finally free to embrace the future without the weight of the past holding me back. As the sun set that evening, casting a warm glow over the workshop, I stepped outside and looked out at the horizon. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I had emerged from the darkness of betrayal stronger, wiser, and more sure of myself than ever before. Sarah joined me on the porch, her hand slipping into mine as we stood together in the fading light. The life I had now wasn't just one of survival, it was one of purpose, love, and quiet fulfillment. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with everything that had brought me to this moment.